Now let's assume a student is learning to taxi an airplane. Would you say that student is learning a skill? Well, you bet they're learning a skill. A lot of learner pilots have trouble with learning to taxi an airplane. Now let's assume you want to improve a physical skill. Well, what does that involve? Well, first of all, it involves training the motor skills. You've got to train a muscular sequence. When you step on the pedal, you're training the actual motor sequence to do that. And it involves the hip, the leg, the foot, and so on. But also, you're training the learner to change perceptions because they begin to be able to tell when they're on the center line and when they're taxiing too fast or they're taxiing too slow. That's another thing involved in physical skills. So motor skills, that's a muscular sequence, and changing perceptions are involved in learning skills. Now let's assume you want to prepare a learner to perform a task like taxiing the airplane. What's the best way to prepare the learner? Well, the best way, according to the FAA, is to provide a clear step-by-step example. So what's a clear step-by-step example? Well, that's a demonstration. You demonstrate it for the learner, and that's the best way to prepare them to perform the task. Now, of course, the learner needs to practice and practice and practice. And as proficiency grows and the learner gets better and better at it, verbal instruction means a lot more to the learner. So why is that? Well, when the learner is first learning, they're so busy they don't hear everything that you're saying. And as they get better at it, you can then make a big improvement with verbal instruction. Now, learners make mistakes all the time. Are they obvious to the learners? No, mistakes are not always obvious to the learner. They don't even know they're making mistakes. But as an instructor, you should not allow them to practice mistakes. Why? Because practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And if they practice mistakes over and over again, they're making permanent something that's not good. So even though mistakes are not always obvious to the learner, you should not allow them to practice mistakes. Now let's talk about how people learn as far as a pattern is concerned. And learning does follow a pattern. It looks like this, and it's called the learning curve. And very often, you'll have a very rapid rate of learning at the first part, then you'll level off and you'll have a plateau. No, not a plateau, a plateau. And there can be several different reasons for hitting a plateau. Maybe the learner has reached the limits of their capability at that time in their training. Perhaps the learner is putting too much pressure on themselves to advance as fast as others. Or maybe it's due to burnout by continuous practice of the same task or skill. I know we've all had plateaus. Many learners will have a plateau when learning to land. Learning to land integrates many individual skills and knowledge elements in a new way, and that can take time to put together into the needed insights. Now, it's natural during a plateau to think, I'll never get off that plateau, but it's normal. It's just a temporary leveling off of an individual's learning rates. Or, as the FAA defines it, a point at which progress slows down or ceases before once again increasing. Now over here on the other side of the plateau, they get insight when they can group these things into meaningful wholes. And they say, ah, I see it now. I can see the big picture. Then all of a sudden, they start learning and making progress at a much faster rate. So what you're doing during these plateaus is waiting for the integration of previous learning and insight, and that just takes time, and that is normal. As an instructor, you can help someone off a plateau by giving a breather. Try moving to a different part of the curriculum to give the learner a sense of accomplishment by introducing them to a new skill or task. Kind of shake things up a bit. Now let's assume you have an individual lesson that just gets longer and longer and longer. Well, would it be a good idea to keep continuing that lesson and let this person keep practicing? The answer is, a beginning learner reaches a point where additional practice is not only unproductive, but it could even be harmful. And so you should not keep drilling the learner or let them practice over and over and over again when they're exhausted, depressed, or discouraged, because they could actually be practicing mistakes and losing motivation. And that's not a good thing, as you know. Well, you really need to think about how long a practice session should go to keep your student motivated to optimize learning and prevent fatigue. So a primary consideration when planning for learner performance is the length of the practice session. Well, future flight instructor, you now have a good overview of learning skills, how to help your students, and what to expect as they learn to fly.